Alrighty, folks, it is December of 2023, and the Unified Agenda, the Fall 2023 Unified Agenda is out. And as always, nobody noticed. It's another weird, obscure rulemaking thing, and almost no one knows that it was published or it came out. But there's a lot of interesting information in there specific to CMMC rulemaking that's relevant to what's going on in the world. So we're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about it very quickly. Save everybody time because we all have presents to wrap.
Team. Together, everyone achieves more. Unified team sounds really good to me. What's the unified team with the rulemaking going on, Jacob? Listen, man. We are just in the holiday spirit. We are throwing out Ted Lasso quotes left and right, and we are just absolutely excited because things in the world of CMMC are changing, right?
That's right. Yeah. So just to summarize, the Unified Agenda is a big deal from a rulemaking perspective. The Unified Agenda comes out twice a year. It comes out in the spring and the fall, which really means the summer and the winter. So the Unified Agenda is the total list of all rulemaking actions that every federal agency is planning to conduct over the next 12 months. As you can tell, since it comes out twice a year, there's a little bit of an overlap, which makes it somewhat confusing to check because when they publish one in the fall, they're estimating what they're going to do for the next 12 months. And then they publish one in the spring, and that's in the middle of what their previous estimate was. So you see this sort of like staggered, updated estimate each time. Just very quickly, we'll link to the Unified Agenda webpage so everybody can check it out. There's a list for literally every federal agency. If you want to know what the federal government is planning to do, from creating regulations or getting rid of regulations, the Unified Agenda is what you need to look at. It's fascinating to look at. It's very interesting to look at. Anyways, the DoD is a federal agency. CMMC is a thing that needs to go through rulemaking. So it's on the Unified Agenda. It's been on the Unified Agenda for some time now. Okay, so another little detail about the Unified Agenda. So what the agencies are going to do is very well defined. Like what they're planning to do as far as rulemaking is very easy for them to estimate. When those rules, as we all know, as we've all learned painfully, is much harder to estimate. So just take the estimates for times with a grain of salt. But what they're going to do is much more solid and reliable information. The other thing to know about the Unified Agenda, the agencies, the reason they call it the spring and the fall agenda is because that's when the agencies submit their regulatory plans to the Office of Management and Budget, but it isn't published for the public to read until several months later, which is why the spring agenda doesn't come out until the summer. Internal for the government, they got it in the spring. We don't all get to see it until summertime. The fall agenda gets submitted like the end of September or something like that, but we never get to see it until like December, January in the winter time, right? So that's why the names don't match up with when we see it. So long way of saying the information was created several months ago, which is why sometimes it'll say, oh, we're planning to publish a rule in November, and then the Unified Agenda comes out in December and it wasn't published in November. So just take that. The time estimates are not specific, but what's going to happen is much more concrete.
So as you started to explain that, I started to think that maybe I dabble in unified agendas a little bit in my life, right? Like, so in my day-to-day work, I work in product management. We create roadmaps, right? What are we working on? When do we expect for that to be done? This is exactly what that is, right? This is a product roadmap, but the product that we are talking about are rules that are pertinent to the DoD, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a much slower, clunkier, governmental, officious product roadmap. But yeah, it's still a roadmap by any other name. Okay, so what we've seen around the hype of CMMC rulemaking and the CMMC rule being published is people are getting wind of the fact that the Unified Agenda is out and there are two CMMC rules. There are two CMMC rules. What the heck is going on? Everyone thought there was one CMMC rule. Well, we're going to sort of dive into that, right? So the TLDR here, if you're only listening this far, the TLDR is there are two CMMC rules. One CMMC rule is required for assessments to be able to begin. This rule is known as 32 CFR CMMC, which we'll explain. The other rule is required for CMMC to be inside DoD contracts, to be a contractual requirement. This is known as 48 CFR CMMC. So what do those CFR things mean? So the CFR is short for the Code of Federal Regulations. This is basically the twin to the U.S. Code, which is where legislation, laws, like the laws live. The Code of Federal Regulations is where regulations live, which effectively have the power of law. It's a long story. The CFR and the U.S. Code kind of go together. Okay, so the CFR is the Code of Federal Regulations, and a rule is another word for a regulation. Rulemaking, as a term, describes how regulations are made and how they're codified in the Code of Federal Regulations. So when a rule is published, what's actually happening is the text of the rule is being written to a specific part of the Code of Federal Regulations, which is divided into what are known as titles, which is where those numbers come from. So Title 48 of the CFR is where contract clauses live. So 48 CFR CMMC means the CMMC contract clause, which we all know as DFARS 252-204 7021. So any contract clause lives in Title 48. So the top of Title 48 is the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation. Any federal-wide acquisition regulation lives in Title 48. Underneath the FAR, you have agency supplements like the DFARS, the Defense FAR Supplement. So all DFARS contract clauses live in Title 48 under the FAR, under the DFARS. Pretty much every agency has their own acquisition supplements under the FAR. Any type of contract clause from any agency or federal-wide lives just in Title 48 of the CFR. There are many, many titles. Okay, so people may remember that the 7021 clause was created by the 2020 CMMC rule, the CMMC rule that was published and put into effect in November of 2020, when the big bang for a lot of people, when they sort of became aware of all this stuff happening. So just as a quick review, the 2020 CMMC rule had two parts. CMMC was only one part. So the first part was known as, or is known as, the DoD assessment methodology, the DODAM, because the rule created DFARS 7019 and DFARS 7020. This is the part that said you got to calculate a score, you got to upload it to SPRS, you got to do all this stuff. It created contract clauses because it's a Title 48 rule. Those clauses live at 48 CFR 252-204 7019 and 7020. The other part of the 2020 rule was the CMMC part. It created DFARS clause 7021, the CMMC clause. Title 48, another clause, same thing. So what the 2020 rule really did was it created two different assessment programs for the same set of requirements, which we know as NIST SP 800 171, right? Okay. The big problem was that the CMMC program wasn't codified anywhere. It was just a series of documents that existed out in the ether. Like the AB's got some of them and the DoD has them. They're not even in a DoD memo. Like they just exist. They were sprung up from somewhere, right? Nobody knows, where they live, what version they're on. It's very outside of the standard process of codifying a program and then having a contract clause point to that program, right? Now, This is a longer conversation that we can maybe get into. It's a little more opinion based because a lot of people are saying we need to go faster. The government needs to go faster. The government needs to innovate. They need to iterate. They need to go fast and break things, right? Well, that's exactly what they did in the 2020 rule. They said, we don't have time to do program rulemaking. We're going to make a clause. We're going to publish some documents. We're going to stand this bad boy up. A bunch of bad stuff just happened. We got to get some assurance over what's going on. Go, go, go. We'll iterate as we go. And everyone said, not like that. Stop what you're doing. There were congressional hearings. There was a GAO analysis. There was public backlash. There was a Pentagon internal review of the program. The moment that the DoD tried to go fast and break things, everybody said, stop. We need to take a second look at this. So pretty much all of 2021 was spent doing these reviews. The Pentagon did their internal review. GAO was doing their review. The DoD IG was doing a review. A bunch of, the Senate Armed Services Committee was looking at it again. Everybody was looking at everything again, right? And so at the end of 2021, they announced CMMC 2.0. What that really was the announcement of CMMC rulemaking at 32 CFR, right? So not another contract clause. We already have the 7021 contract clause. It's not being inserted into contracts, but it exists because it was created in 2021. So what they're doing with this rule is they're creating the CMMC program at 32 CFR. Remember, contract clauses go in 48 CFR. Programs go at 32 CFR, specifically national security programs. We'll link to that part of the CFR, but you're talking about stuff that are like Pentagon level programs. You've got everything from like the VA home loan program, the SAPR program, the GI Bill, CMMC, right? This is like big time Pentagon level, DoD wide codified program. How it works, what happens, where it lives, when it's updated. The slow machinery of government that people really don't like is what everybody really asked for in 2020. That's what we got started in 2021. And then that's what's in the 2023 CMMC rule. Okay, so just to sum up, the 2023 CMMC rule codifies the program, the CMMC program at 32 CFR. The 2020 CMMC rule codifies the CMMC contract clause at 48 CFR, which is why we said one rule is needed for assessments to begin. The program has to be codified at 32 CFR to become effective, to become live. And then another rule is required for CMMC to be required in your contracts. Okay, so we've seen this question come up where people say, oh, well, the 2023 rule is proposed and CMMC assessments can't start until there's a final rule. When is it going to be in contracts? Effectively, based off everything that we've heard from DoD, based off the attorneys that we've talked to, we're not attorneys, make sure you ask yours, but based off the way that this is playing out, the 32 CFR CMMC rule and the 48 CFR CMMC rule go together, right? And DoD is heavily incentivized to make sure that these rules go final at the same time so they can start inserting the clause into contracts and assessments can begin. However, the rules are staggered somewhat. So the 32 CFR CMMC rule is really the thing that everybody wants to pay attention to, the 2023 rule, essentially, because once the 2023 rule is on the books, and that process of public comments has started, and then you get the final rule, assessments can begin. Once the CMMC program at 32 CFR is final, you can go get a CMMC assessment from a C3PAO because the program is live.
So that was one of my questions.
Yeah.
Is that so? The thing that opens the gates for non-JSVA C3PAO led assessments is 32 CFR.
Correct.
And that is what is the one that is in immediate fashion. Really, the
Correct.
one that we are. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So once 32 CFR CMMC is final, then assessments can begin based off everything that we've been told. And DoD is planning on clarifying this. I really hope they get back on the habit of lots of webinars and updates so that they can clarify this. But once the program is live, and the program can operate. It can happen. When DoD can insert the 7021 clause into contracts is dependent on when that contract clause is updated to point to 32 CFR. Right now, it doesn't point to anything. The 48 CFR clause needs to point to the program.
Right.
Now, that isn't a significant update. It shouldn't take a significant amount of time. There probably won't be much delay at all, if any, for the final version of 32 CFR CMC 2023 rule and the final version of 48 CFR, the 2020 CMMC rule, if that makes sense. And
So you're
ultimately,
saying that 48 CFR isn't going to be this long,
no.
drawn out process that we just currently experienced, right?
No, because 48 CFR CMC effectively already exists because the
Right.
clause was created in 2020. So effectively, if you go read the 721 clause, it's not very long. It's only like 10 paragraphs or something like that. It doesn't actually point to anything. The 2023 CMMC rule creates CMMC at 32 CFR section 170, and then all these subsections and how the
Hmm.
program works and blah 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 blah. The 48 CFR rule is going to be updated to say, hey, go get a CMMC certification in accordance with everything written at 32 CFR
Okay.
170, blah 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 blah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if I were to say that, let's say that CMMC is a shed. Okay. 48 CFR is essentially build a shed. And 32 CFR is the instructions, what materials, how the specifications, the heights, and everything like that. Right?
Yeah.
Is that a good way to break it down? Like,
Yeah, because if you go read 48 CFR 252 7021, the CMMC clause, it doesn't really say anything. It just says insert this clause. Hey, program officers and contract officers, insert this clause into contracts. Contractors need to go get a CMMC certification in accordance with the level of data that they have. That's all it says.
absolutely.
Everything else is going to be at 32 CFR. Whereas at the end of 2021, we had the clause and it said, go get a CMMC cert. And everybody went, where's the horse that pulls the cart? Like, what are we doing here? Now, you probably should have done that all along, but that takes a lot of time, as we've all learned. And circa 2018, 2019, the DoD was like, we don't have time. We're losing
Yeah.
all this data
They
immediately.
bought all the materials. They were building the shed without knowing what was going on. We'll just piece it together. We'll figure it out as we get
Yeah.
there. And
You know,
realistically, it wasn't the plan that needed to
it
happen.
was it was justifiable. It was justifiable in going quickly. It's probably less justifiable to take 3+ years after you were like, hey, this is an emergency, but that's a longer story. Either way, just so everybody knows, let's just assume that the 48 CFR rule and the 32 CFR rule go final on the same day, right? That doesn't mean that you will have CMMC required in all contracts overnight, because as we've heard from DoD, there will be a multi-year phased rollout where the CMMC clause is inserted into groups of contracts in phases over several years, and it will eventually be in all contracts. So that another way of looking at this is it really doesn't matter when the 48 CFR rule goes final compared to the 32 CFR rule going final, because the 48 CFR clause won't be in all contracts to begin with, even if they go final at the same time. The one that really matters is, when is the 32 CFR CMMC program rule from 2023 final? That's when assessments can begin. When DoD makes you go get an assessment is a function of the 48 CFR rule. But as we've talked about, a lot of prime contractors, a lot of big mega prime customers are going to tell people to go get their CMMC certifications as soon as they're available, not necessarily when DoD has inserted it into specific groups of contracts or not. So there's two rules. There's a good reason why there's two rules. They're not very well explained by DoD. They should go final right around the same time as each other, but the one that everyone really needs to pay attention to is, when will the 32 CFR CMMC rule, the program, become final, not necessarily the 48 CFR rule. That's much faster, much quicker to update, much less impactful.
So I have one more question to run by you, if that's
Yeah.
cool with you. And so it kind of came up as we were going through this. So a lot of the questions that we have, and it has to do with NIST 800-171 revision 3, how that adapts into CMMC, right? We don't want to talk about, we know there's a lot of process that goes along with that, but this is a part of that process. So you said that 48 CFR, that's where they update the DODAN.
Well, so that's the other. Okay, so a little bonus content here. So if you look at the unified agenda, you'll notice that there are 3 cybersecurity rules. So sorry to introduce new information at the end here. If you've listened all the way to the end, congratulations, you've unlocked bonus level. So there are 3 cyber rules for DoD. 2 of them are related to CMMC. So remember, in 2020, we had one rule with 2 parts: DODAM, CMMC. What DoD did at the end of 2021 was they split the 2020 rule, and they said, you have a rule for DODAM, you have a rule for 48 CFR CMMC, and we're going to start the rulemaking process for 32 CFR CMMC. So there is a rule for 7019 and 7020. There's a rule for 7021. There's a rule for the CMMC program itself.
Okay.
Now, because the 2020 rule was interim final, it was effective immediately, which is why people had to comply with 7019 and 7020. They had to calculate and upload their score right away. So the DODAM rule that is the final rule won't actually mean much, because it's mostly going to be DoD's responses to public comments. They might, update and edit some things, but the rule is effective. It is in black and white in the Code of Federal Regulations. It's in contracts. It's in purchase orders. It's been there for several years at this point. But yeah, they effectively split the rule. Splitting rules is not super uncommon, but it just gets messy. They had two different programs under one rule. They decided that they were going to reinforce and cement the idea of the CMMC program. So they split the 2020 rule. They created an additional rulemaking at a different part of the Code of Federal Regulations. And that's what everybody, waited on for so long. Meanwhile, the DoD started explaining less and less about what was happening, even though there were 3 times the number of rules back when they were talking a bunch. And so everybody's like, I don't know what's going on. It's super weird. But
does that make it easier for like future updates if you split them? Obviously, you segment these different rules. So if you have to update one, instead of going through a full update of 3 different types or 3 different rules that aren't related, you're just going through an update one for that particular topic that has been updated, right? So is that what the strategy is, right? Like I'm not saying for you to speak to the strategy, but do you think that kind of makes it easier in the process? It doesn't elongate the rulemaking process.
It's the holidays. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. And let's say, that was the big brain strategy idea all along. That's exactly how they drew it up. And they go, what would make this process better and more efficient and more strategic?
If we ran the annexation of Puerto Rico.
If we split the rules. Now, I don't think they had any intention of splitting the rules when they wrote the rule. I think a lot of, actually, I take that back. It's the holidays. Merry Christmas, everybody. The DoD is doing a great job. So, there are actually 3 cyber rules. 2 of them are CMMC. 1 of them is the DoD assessment methodology. 2 of them, ironically, relate to contract clauses. 1 of them relates to the CMMC program. This unified agenda is out. You can read all the details of what they are. But like I said, the ultimate takeaway here is the 32 CFR 2023 CMMC rule. That's the one, once it goes final, that will allow assessments to begin. That's the one that will allow your customers to pressure you into getting CMMC assessments probably way faster than you were expecting. The 48 CFR CMMC rule is the one that allows DoD to insert the 7021 clause into contracts. That's going to occur over a multi-year phased rollout anyways. So don't freak out if you hear that there's some sort of a gap or delay between both of them going final. The 48 CFR rule can lag behind the 32 CFR rule by a couple months, and nobody will ever actually be able to tell the difference.
That makes total sense to me. I get it now. I just didn't realize that, like, so we were blindsided. I was blindsided because, we post and we're excited about, the CMMC rules and everything like that. And they're like, well, wait a minute, people may have their input. And I'm glad that you came on here and you kind of clarified what was being said. We have to wait for this, we have to wait for that. So realistically, we don't have to wait. And once, all of this is done, hopefully we don't ever have to wait this long again, right?
Yeah. Well, we'll cross that rulemaking bridge when we rulemaking get to it, as far as when things need to be updated. But as of this point, like I said, it's the holiday. We'll worry about all that after the holidays, right?
You're very generous. These past couple of weeks, you've been very generous. Great job, DoD. Like, good job. Keep it up.
You're doing wonderful. No coal for you. Yeah. So there's 2 different CMMC rules. Hopefully DoD tries to clarify what's going on. If not, share this podcast with your friends and make sure you repost it whenever you see silly comments on LinkedIn about people fretting over the fact that there are 2 rules and they're not happening exactly at the same time. The one that DoD was working on all the way since the announcement of CMMC 2.0 is the one that really matters. because once that's final, that's the one that will pressure you into getting CMMC. The 48 CFR rule is just the clause being updated that was created back in 2020. Doesn't take multiple years to do that. It's been happening in the background while the big program rule has been happening. So that's what's going on. You need one for program for assessments to start. You need one for contract clauses to be inserted. You'll have both of them together almost at the same time, most likely. And that's how the CMMC rulemaking works in the 2023 fall unified agenda that nobody reads.
Apparently somebody reads it.
Yeah, there you go.
Looks across screen.
Yeah, it's twice a year. It's a big event. It's me and 3 other people all get to read the.
It's like a farmer's almanac, right? Like it's like you're gonna look at it. It may rain on December 19th. I'm not sure. December 19th.
How did you know what was
50% chance? Yeah, 50% chance. Bro.
The agencies tell you exactly what's going to happen twice a year. It's crazy. Anyways, everyone should read the unified agenda. If you're curious about what any other agency is doing, they've listed all their rulemaking. So Control F for cyber, Control F for contracts, Control F for all kinds of fun stuff. You never know what you're going to find. There's stuff in there from Department of Education. There's stuff in there from FAR Council. There's stuff in there from a bunch of different agencies. Most people are just worried, who are listening to this, just worried about the DoD. But we'll link to it. Do your civic duty and figure out what your government is doing via the creation of regulations. And let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks, everybody.
Right. Thanks. Stay off the naughty list.
Stay off the naughty list.